The afternoon heat pressed against the windows of the small apartment in Fortaleza as Daniel wiped motorcycle grease from his fingers and checked his phone for the fourth time. His mother, Helena, had texted earlier, "Don't forget to bring pão de queijo." He smiled. Saturdays were for laundry, soccer on TV, and his mother's gentle questions that never pushed too hard. He was 27, a mechanic with a loyal list of customers, comfortable in the rhythm of days that looked like one another. He'd always said the same line to friends who teased him about being an only child. "It's just me and my mom, less noise, more cake." Then the phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. Instead, he swiped. "Hello?" A woman's voice, careful as if walking across glass. "Is this Daniel Alves, born June 3rd? He felt the oddness before the fear. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Renata. I think I'm your sister." The room went silent. Even the fan sounded far away, as if the world had moved down the hall without him. Sister? The word didn't fit anywhere inside him. Daniel leaned against the counter, searching for something sturdy, an instruction manual, a joke, a lie, to hold on to. None came. Renata spoke again, filling the quiet with details that sounded like passwords to a locked door. The hospital near Aldeota, the midwife's name, a blue blanket with a small embroidered sailboat. "Our mother used to talk about you," she said. "She called you O Barquinho, the little boat. She had to give you up." The story broke across Renata's breath. "Daniel, there are 6 of us. We found you through records. We've been looking for years." He caught sight of himself in the dark screen of the microwave, mouth slightly open, a man who laughed easily now standing utterly still. He remembered school field trips where permission slips had only one signature. He remembered birthdays where he blew out candles and Helena hugged him a little too long, as if apologizing for something he didn't know to miss. A small, unexpected ache unfurled. What if the silence of the apartment hadn't been normal, just familiar? 6? He managed. "I don't understand." "I know it's a lot." Renata's voice softened. "We're not trying to take anything from you. We just want to know you. We want you to know us. We're in Recife. 2 of us are there. The others are in Olinda, Caruaru, and São Paulo. If you want, I can tell you our names." Daniel looked at the framed photo on the fridge. Him at age 5, flour on his cheeks. Helena behind him, hands on his shoulders, both grinning. Everything he was rose up to defend that picture. "I was adopted," he heard himself say, as if reminding someone. The caller, his future self, the ceiling. My mother raised me." "I'm not trying to replace anyone," Renata said quickly. "We're grateful to her, truly. But can I say the names?" He wasn't sure why he nodded. She couldn't see him. "Okay. Me, Renata. Then João, twins Luisa and Laura, then Marcos, and little Bia. She's 21 now, not little at all. We grew up knowing there was a 7th, a baby who left in winter. We told stories about you, what you might like, what you might look like. Do you like the sea? We always thought you would. The sailboat. The nickname. The strange, stubborn craving he had to stop his motorcycle near the beach at Mucuripe just to watch the horizon cut a clean line in the day. The coincidence felt almost rude. "What would you want from me?" he asked, his voice low. "Coffee, maybe," she said, a tiny laugh escaping, nervous and hopeful. "A conversation, pictures, or nothing. We'll respect that. But if you ever felt alone and you weren't, wouldn't you want to know?" He ended the call promising to think, promising nothing more. The apartment had the same worn chair and the same plant drooping in the corner. But everything had shifted, like furniture after an earthquake. He called Helena. I'm coming early." "Trouble?" she asked, immediate, alert. "No, just, I need to talk." The bus ride across town was a carousel of thoughts. What counted as family? The ones who changed your diapers or the ones whose cheekbones you shared? Could both be true? Could he love 7 people without betraying the 8th? He imagined 6 faces lined up like photographs in a stranger's hallway, each with a story already in progress that had somehow been missing him. Would they be anything like him? Would they resent him for leaving without choosing to? If you were in Daniel's place, would you call back or keep your life exactly as it is? Helena lived in a tidy building with a garden that always smelled faintly of jasmine. She opened the door before he knocked, as if she'd been listening for his footsteps. "Mio figlio," she said, and then saw his face. Her expression shifted. Not fear, exactly, but history. "Sit," she told him, guiding him to the sofa. The old fan whirred above them like an anxious bird. He tried for a careful approach and failed. "A woman called," he said. "Renata. She says she's my sister." There it was. The tiniest exhale, like air escaping a sealed jar. Helena didn't deny it. "I'm sorry I wasn't ready sooner," she said, and her voice held a weight that made his chest tighten. "I was afraid of losing you. I know that's not fair." "You knew?" A dozen scenes from childhood rearranged like puzzle pieces, finding where they belonged. The questions he'd asked, the ones she'd dodged, the certificates locked in a drawer she never opened when he was around. "I knew there were others," she said. "Your biological mother wrote a letter. I read it 100 times. I was going to tell you when I could do it without shaking." She smiled, and it was heartbreakingly brave. "It seems I'm still shaking." He didn't know whether to be angry or grateful. He was both, which surprised him less than it should have. "Do you still have the letter?" She stood, walked to the bedroom, and returned with a cream envelope, edges softened by years. He took it in both hands. On the front, in tidy blue ink, was his name. Inside, the first line caught his breath. "If you ever find a blue paper boat in your pocket, know that I am thinking of you." He felt something in him tilt toward the sea again. He read on. The letter held no excuses, only a map of the poverty and fear that had cut one life into many. It didn't ask forgiveness, only understanding. It mentioned 6 children by name. It called him meu barquinho. The sun had slipped lower when he folded the paper shut. He looked at Helena, at the woman who had turned her apartment into a harbor big enough for all his storms. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. Her answer was immediate. "Whatever lets you sleep, whatever lets you breathe. And remember, there is nothing you could discover that would make me love you less." He nodded, and a decision rose in him like a tide he'd been moving with all along. He picked up his phone and scrolled to the last call. His finger hovered above the screen. The world felt suddenly wider, 6 voices waiting on the other side of a ringtone. He tapped. The line began to buzz. "Would you have called? Or would you have waited? Tell me in the comments. I read them all. And if this story has already pulled you in, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The café Renata chose in Recife sat on a corner where the streets smelled of roasted beans and damp stone after rain. Daniel had barely slept the night before. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw 6 silhouettes waiting for him, blurry and insistent. Now he stood outside the glass door, his hand on the handle, heart hammering like a mechanic's tool against steel. Inside, Renata rose from a table. Her hair was pulled back, her smile tentative, as if she were afraid too much eagerness would scare him away. For a moment, Daniel simply stared, trying to find himself in the curve of her cheekbones or the angle of her jaw. She looked familiar and yet entirely new. "Daniel?" she asked, her voice breaking the air between them. He nodded. She hugged him quickly, awkwardly, but he didn't pull away. When they sat, Renata pushed a photo across the table. 6 children crowded together, sunburned and laughing. "This was us at the beach in Olinda. That space," she pointed to the edge of the blanket. "We always said it was yours, even though we had no idea what you looked like." Daniel traced the photo with his finger. He wasn't sure whether to feel honored or robbed. "And you've been looking for me all this time? Since we were old enough to understand why there was always one chair left empty," she said softly. "Our mother never hid you from us. She said you were part of our story, even if you weren't there." A waiter placed 2 small coffees on the table. Daniel sipped, grateful for something to do with his hands. "Why now?" "Records finally opened. João managed to track down your adoption papers. It wasn't easy. We didn't even know if you'd want contact." The name landed like a pebble in water. "João. A brother, someone who had grown up playing soccer with borrowed shoes while Daniel had a tidy apartment and a steady job. A guilt he hadn't asked for began to stir. Renata leaned closer. Would you like to meet them? Not all at once. Just one or two. Maybe João first. He's been the most eager. Daniel's instinct was to say no. His world was already shaking, and more faces might make it collapse entirely. But curiosity slipped past fear. Okay, he said, surprising himself. The next day they met João in a park. João was broad-shouldered, with a laugh that rang out before he'd even finished speaking. When he saw Daniel, he froze for a second, then strode forward and hugged him with both arms, unself-conscious. You look like our father, he said, voice thick. Daniel didn't know what to do with the compliment. Their father, his father, was a ghost in his life, a man he'd never thought about until yesterday. But João's sincerity left no room for rejection. Daniel found himself laughing, a nervous sound that cracked open something inside him. For hours they walked the park, Renata filling gaps with childhood stories, how Luisa always cut her doll's hair, how Laura once painted the dog blue, how Bia sang louder than any church choir. Each name carried weight now, no longer abstract. By the time the sun dipped, Daniel felt like he was walking with people who had memorized the verses of a song he'd never learned, but somehow already knew the chorus. Still, doubt clung to him. On the bus ride back to Fortaleza, he texted Helena. I met them. They're real. She replied almost immediately. So are you. Don't lose yourself in the search. That night he lay awake, torn between two families, the one who had raised him and the one who had waited. Was it betrayal to love them both? Or was love the only thing big enough to hold all these pieces together? The following weekend, Daniel traveled again, this time to Olinda, where the pastel houses leaned into cobblestone streets and the air smelled of salt and sugarcane. Renata had arranged for him to meet the twins, Luisa and Laura. He rehearsed what to say on the ride. Nice to meet you. I'm your brother. Sorry for being missing my whole life. None of it felt right. He found them waiting near a church square. At first glance, the twins looked nothing alike. Luisa had hair cropped short, dyed a streak of electric red, while Laura wore hers long, tucked neatly behind her ears. But the moment they laughed, Daniel saw it. The mirrored tilt of their heads, the same sparkle that made strangers smile back. You came, Luisa exclaimed, hugging him with the confidence of someone who didn't need permission. Laura hung back more cautious, her eyes searching his face as though reading a text written long ago. Daniel offered his hand to her, but she surprised him with a quiet embrace. I wasn't sure you'd want to see us, she admitted. I almost told Renata not to push. He shook his head. I wasn't sure either, but here I am. They walked through narrow alleys where carnival masks hung in shop windows. The twins told stories in overlapping voices, how they'd played pranks at school, how they'd swapped places to fool teachers, how their mother would scold one only to discover it was the other. Daniel listened, half in awe, half in grief for the years he'd missed. At a small café, Luisa grew serious. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever resent our mother for letting you go? The question caught him like a sudden drop in the road. He thought of the letter, folded carefully in his drawer at home, of the blue sailboat sketched in the corner. I don't know if resentment is the word. Confusion, maybe. Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like to grow up with all of you. But then I think, if she hadn't chosen what she did, I wouldn't have Helena. And Helena is everything. Laura nodded slowly. That's fair. We don't resent her either, but we resented the silence. We wanted to know you. The honesty stung, but it was clean, like salt water on a wound. Daniel realized this meeting wasn't only about what he could gain, it was also about what they had lost, carrying the weight of an absence shaped like him. Later, as they parted, Luisa pressed a small gift into his hand, a seashell painted with blue waves. Just so you don't forget Olinda, or us. On the bus ride back, Daniel turned the shell over in his palm. It felt both fragile and permanent. He sent Helena another message. They're different from me, but somehow the same. It's strange. Her reply came minutes later. Strange doesn't mean wrong. Let your heart be curious, not afraid. But curiosity carried its own cost. The more siblings he met, the more he feared the day he would have to meet the one who hadn't spoken yet. Marcos. Renata had hinted he was more guarded, less forgiving. And then there was Bia, the youngest, whose excitement was already flooding his messages with emojis and questions. Daniel closed his eyes as the bus hummed down the highway. A family of 7, stitched together by blood and stories half shared, half hidden. Was there enough room inside him to belong to both worlds? Or would one inevitably push the other out? The answer waited in the faces he had yet to see. Rain drizzled over Recife when Daniel finally agreed to meet Marcos and Bia. He had delayed it for weeks, answering Renata's texts with polite excuses, work deadlines, a client's motorcycle breaking down, a friend's birthday. But the truth was simpler: fear. Meeting Renata, Juan, and the twins had been overwhelming enough. What if Marcos confirmed the dread he carried? That not all siblings would welcome him. They chose a quiet diner near the bus terminal. Renata was there first, sipping tea. Minutes later, Bia burst through the door, her energy like a beam of sunlight scattering the gloom. She was 21, with curly hair that refused to be tamed, and a grin wide enough to erase distance. "Finally!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around Daniel before he could even stand. "I thought you'd never say yes." Her warmth disarmed him. He found himself laughing, tension loosening from his shoulders. "I wasn't sure you'd want me," he admitted. Bia pulled back, her eyes fierce. "We always wanted you. You're our missing puzzle piece, don't ever doubt that." The words settled in him like a bomb. But before he could respond, the door creaked again, and Marcos entered. Tall, with a hardened jaw and eyes that weighed everything, Marcos didn't smile. He greeted Renata with a nod, hugged Bia quickly, then turned his gaze to Daniel. It wasn't hostility exactly, but it wasn't welcome either. It was appraisal, like a man judging whether a bridge could bear his weight. "You're him," Marcos said flatly, sliding into the booth. Daniel sat straighter. "I guess I am." Silence stretched, filled only by the clink of cups and the hiss of steam from the kitchen. Finally, Marcos leaned forward. "Do you know what it was like for us growing up? Sharing one plate of food between 3 kids? Listening to our mother cry at night because she couldn't provide? And all that time, you, our brother, were living in comfort, with opportunities we never had." His words struck like blows Daniel hadn't braced for. Guilt surged uninvited. "I didn't choose." "I know you didn't choose," Marcos cut in sharply, "but neither did we." Bia placed a hand on her brother's arm. "Marcos, stop. This isn't his fault." Marcos pulled away but didn't leave. He stared at Daniel as though daring him to flinch. Daniel held the gaze, though his throat burned. "You're right," he said quietly. "I had more than you. More than all of you. And I don't know how to carry that without feeling like I stole something. But I didn't ask for it. I only lived the life I was given. Just like you." The honesty seemed to surprise Marcos. His eyes softened, only slightly, but enough. He leaned back, arms crossed. "Maybe. But it's hard not to wonder what it would have been like if you'd stayed. Maybe things would have been easier for us. Or maybe harder. We'll never know." Daniel nodded. "No, we won't. But we know this. We're here now. We can't change the past, but maybe we can decide what happens next." For the first time, a flicker of respect crossed Marcos's face. He didn't answer, but he didn't leave either. The meal unfolded slowly. Bia filled the silence with stories, her laughter contagious. By the end, even Marcos cracked a reluctant smile at one of her jokes. When they said goodbye, he gave Daniel a firm handshake that lingered just a second too long to be purely formal. As Daniel walked back into the rain, he felt the weight of the encounter pressing on him. Each sibling brought a new piece of himself: joy, doubt, guilt, belonging. He was no longer just a son or a mechanic. He was part of a mosaic bigger than he could have imagined. But one piece still remained unseen: his biological mother. Renata had whispered of her illness, of her wish to meet him before it was too late. The thought chilled him. Could he face the woman who had let him go? and still find the strength to forgive? The call came on a Tuesday evening. Renata's voice trembled as she spoke. Daniel, it's Maman. She wants to see you. She's been asking, and her health is worsening. Daniel froze in the garage, oil-stained rag clutched in his hand. He had imagined this moment in countless ways, his mother young, strong, full of answers. But the reality was different. Time had moved on, and so had pain. 2 days later, he stood outside a modest house in Caruaru. His siblings had gathered, Renata holding Bia's hand, João with an arm protectively around Laura, Luisa fidgeting with her red-streaked hair, Marcos silent but steady. They ushered him in. The room smelled faintly of chamomile and rain-damp sheets. On the bed lay a woman whose face bore the lines of years and sacrifices, but her eyes, deep, dark, and alive, lit up when she saw him. Meu barquinho, she whispered. Daniel's throat closed. He stepped closer, each movement heavy. I'm Daniel, he said, though the truth was more complicated. He was her son, and not her son. She reached for his hand with fragile fingers. I've waited so long to touch you again. He sat, letting her warmth anchor him. Around them, silence reigned, siblings holding their breath, time itself pausing. I need to tell you why, she said, voice raspy. Your father left. I had nothing, 6 mouths already, and another on the way. I feared you'd starve, that I'd watch you fade like smoke. So I chose adoption. I gave you away not because I didn't love you, but because I loved you too much to let you suffer. Daniel felt the words pierce and mend all at once. He wanted to shout, to cry, to say how could you and thank you in the same breath. Instead, he whispered, I had a good life. Helena loved me like her own. A tear slipped down the woman's cheek. Then I chose well. Bia sniffled loudly, breaking the silence. Marcos looked away, jaw tight, but Daniel saw his hand tremble as it rested on the bed frame. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the letter Helena had kept all these years. I read this, the one you wrote when I was born. Her eyes widened. She kept it? Even after all this time? She did. And she raised me with the kind of love you prayed I'd have. But I need you to know, I don't hate you. I don't resent you. I forgive you. The words cracked something open in the room. Renata began to sob quietly. Laura covered her face with her hands. Even Marcos closed his eyes as though letting go of a weight he had carried for too long. His mother squeezed his hand with surprising strength. Then my heart can rest, she murmured. I only ever wanted you safe, meu barquinho, and now you are. They stayed like that for a long while. The siblings gathered close, their hands overlapping on the quilt, a patchwork family finally stitched together. When Daniel left the room hours later, the night sky spread wide above Caruaru, stars scattered like lanterns. He felt the ache of loss, but also the fullness of belonging. For the first time in his life, he wasn't an only child. He was one of 7. As the siblings stood outside together, João clapped him on the back. So, brother, do you like soccer? Daniel laughed through tears. Let's just say I've been playing alone for too long. Time to join a team. They walked into the night, 7 shadows moving as one. Family, Daniel realized, wasn't about perfect beginnings. It was about the courage to open doors, forgive scars, and share the table no matter how late someone arrived. And maybe that was the lesson. That love, when multiplied, doesn't divide. It grows. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, and share it with someone who believes. And tell me, would you hear your story might inspire someone else today?